I'm Bryce Futch,
I'm Spencer Amaral.
and this is The Way Forward. Welcome back to another episode of The Way Forward podcast. We've been reunited once again, back with the Spencer Amaral. It's good to have you. Eric Tietzel is great, but he's no Spencer Amaral. I just want you to know that.
Good to be back with you, Bryce.
Good to have you. So this episode is going to be kind of a continuation of our last. So last time we talked about the election, and it was kind of a recap. Now we want to dig into a little more of what the 2025 legislative cycle could look like. First 100 days within a presidency is typically their most effective. That's when they can get the majority of their legislative agenda passed, and especially with the mandate that President Trump had coming out of this election. It's really interesting because there's a mandate for him as president, but the House is still very narrowly divided, right? We don't have a massive majority. I was originally skeptical that we were going to win the House. And then with like the last 2 weeks, I kind of got pretty bullish on it and thought we would win fairly significantly. And if you look at the number of seats that we flipped, it's almost even. The Democrats and the Republicans have flipped almost the same amount of seats, which is crazy to think about how people make split ticket decisions when they vote. And why? Why did they decide to do that? Why would they decide to vote for the Democratic challenger to their Republican congressman and then vote for Donald Trump as president? I don't understand how that computes, but it does for many Americans. And so for Congress, for both the House and the Senate, and then for the president, it's going to be really important for them to figure out how to thread that needle. And I think it's good. I think that helps us get legislation that actually moves the ball and that can sometimes be a little more bipartisan. So we'll see how all that shakes out. But I want to talk about a couple things specifically that we think are really important. There's one bill that we feel fairly confident is going to come up in this first 100 days. It's also going to be here at our state level as well, and that's Save Women's Sports. The idea that no woman, no young girl should have to compete against a biological male in the sport of their choosing. And I think this is really important as we kind of reclaim the family and reclaim the moral high ground for some of these really common sense issues. So it'll be very interesting to see how the national bill compares to the state-based bill here in Georgia and what those two look like and how they go together. Spencer, do you want to talk just a little bit about how kind of realigning this is just healthy for society?
Yeah, well, the good news is, like you said, if it's an 80-20 issue, there's a lot of common sense consensus in terms of observing the reality of nature, and that there are men and there are women.
Absolutely.
This is by God's design. And I guess that there's two approaches, right? There's the people that view this politically as a problem in terms of if your goal is to make all things the same, all things equal in that sense, then the difference between the sexes is problematic, and you're going to look for any way that you can diminish those differences. But if we view all of nature as inherently ordered by God's design, filled with God's purpose, endowed with a deeper meaning than we can possibly fathom. That's true for people made in the image of God. It's true for the whole world, which has a sacramental relationship to God. And we're called to be stewards of the whole world, and thus to see the meaning in it all. Living into that would also involve acknowledging the differences and the uniqueness between men and women. Yeah. And building a society that responds to that properly, right? And observes the dignity in each and honors the uniqueness of both. This is why I really react negatively to any appeal to sameness as the solution to the world's problems. Render all things into a lowest common denominator.
Right. That's really good. Let's talk a little bit about those differences. So, for example, when I think about truth, I put truth in two categories, right? Objective and subjective. Subjective doesn't really affect reality. It's more of my preference and my desire, like my favorite flavor of ice cream. Objective truth is about how an object interacts with the world around it, such as, insulin treats diabetes, ice cream does not, right? Doesn't matter how much you like insulin, doesn't matter how much you like ice cream. Those two things interact with the world in a specific way.
Yep.
So when we talk about the difference between men and women, right, if we take this out to just the basis stereotypes, that doesn't mean that men can't enjoy or be good cooks, and it doesn't mean that women can't lift weights and be very strong, right? So talk about those two differences. Talk about the differences that are more subjective versus objective, and what's a right worldview on how we kind of flesh that out a bit.
Yeah, well, what you want to do is again, me coming at this from a biblical perspective, But I think that this is a great point of commonality with anybody I could walk up to in the street. Because at the end of the day, when we open up our eyes and we look at the world around us, what do you see? Do you see something that is random and meaningless and waiting for you to, put your print on it? Or are you looking around at a world that is filled with beauty and wonder and truth and goodness and order and meaning? And if the latter is the case, then we can affirm a really beautiful concept of human rights and human dignity. And that's why we have laws that protect people from murder and all the rest of it. Now, you keep drilling down into that concept of design and purpose, right? If things have a purpose, this kind of goes back to Aristotle's concept of virtue. What makes a thing virtuous?
Right.
What makes this cup virtuous? This cup is virtuous by Aristotle's definition if it fulfills its purpose that it was designed for. So this cup is designed to hold a liquid and allow me to hold on to it without spilling it on my lap and get it to my mouth, right? If it's cracked, it won't do that purpose very effectively. But if it's a good mug, then it'll do that thing well, and thus it would qualify as a virtuous mug. For people, these conversations always require us to talk about the purpose that's built into our design. And so, like you said, guys can be great bakers. Women can be incredible athletes.
Yeah.
And we're not pretending otherwise. But when you look at what's unique and distinct about each, the design of man and woman is inherently complementary, and men are capable of doing certain things that women can't do, and women can do certain things that men can't do. And even maybe in an emergency scenario, you could try to cover all the bases. You could try. Right. I would argue there's still certain things you can't do, and the most basic one is procreation, right? Yeah. But even then, we are far more effective when we offer our greatest strengths to complement the greatest weaknesses of the people around us. And when everyone's doing that, I mean, in morning prayer this morning, we read from 1 Peter, and he talked about everyone has their own unique strength given by God. It's a gift, and your job is to take the gift that you have, your strength, and you offer it for the good of the people around you, to the glory of God. And that's how I would approach the differences in the sexes between men and women, and that's true on an individual level. It's true on a gender level. But we're coming along and offering our unique strengths. This reminds me also of, I believe it was, I can't remember who it was. Was it Hegseth? The pick for Secretary of Defense?
Yes, yep.
It might have been him, might have been someone else, but there was someone on the news commenting on the role that women play in combat and in the military. And a big part of this that we've stopped talking about is the role of standards.
Yes.
Right? Because if the goal is sameness, then you're going to be oriented towards meeting quotas, and a successful military would be one where you have 50% men, 50% women. But if the goal is an effective fighting force that it is optimally lethal and able to fulfill the mission to the very best of its ability, then it's about meeting standards.
Right.
And the standards cannot be sacrificed.
Right.
And if you find an exceptional woman with incredible upper body strength that can meet all the standards necessary for a lethal fighting force, that's one exception, right, to the rule that I think most people could have reasonable acceptance for. And then there's the reality that most women are not going to meet the standards, which is why the standards over the past few decades have declined as we've pursued more of a quota-driven military outcome rather than a standards-driven outcome.
That's really good, especially on the military piece, because there's been a push recently to include women in the draft. And I think that's just an absolutely huge mistake. I think that's something that every dad, every husband needs to stand up against.
Oh, I would vote no on that
100%
every day.
of the time, right?
Yeah.
And we need to speak out against it. It's one thing, like you said, there are, in that specific context, there are some women that are extremely athletic, that are very fit, that could absolutely do that job. In some cases, better than some men. And
absolutely,
and they should be allowed to volunteer and to go do that. But there's no reason for us as a society to say that in a time of crisis, we're going to call on our women to stand up and defend our men. I think that's just absolutely foolish. I think if we take this conversation to its next, kind of its logical next step, is this also falls into the transgender surgery piece, which is a big one right now. So Georgia has a ban on transgender surgeries for minors. There's some more work to be done there. But nationally, there's discussion of a national abortion, or not a national abortion ban, rather a national transgender surgery for minors ban, which would be phenomenal. I mean, the fact that these things are taking children at some of their most vulnerable stages. You know, we don't let a 6-year-old take Advil or Tylenol without a parent's note, but they can walk into their school in some of these liberal states and say, I identify as my opposite gender, and the school will affirm that and hide it from the parents is just absolutely foolish. And so the idea that we're trying to change your identity, but you can't change the biology, right? You can't change your cellular makeup. You can't change your DNA. But we're going to make the aesthetic changes to try and make you look the part that you want to play, which studies now have shown is actually incredibly harmful. I mean, those of us with common sense have always known.
Well, of course, you're cutting up a healthy body.
Absolutely. But for those on the left who need some more convincing, the long-term studies of this in places like the UK and Europe are showing it's incredibly harmful, which is why the United Kingdom has banned transgender surgery for minors all across their country, right?
Which should be common sense.
Exactly. And they are a very progressive, a very liberal society, and the fact that they have taken that strong of a stance against it shows how much more so we need to be. It's an absolutely horrific practice, and it has to stop.
If nothing else, we should be able to agree that what's at stake here is the inherent dignity of the human body and whether it matters at all, right? And we spend so much time, it seems like, culturally talking about bodily autonomy, and yet the moment that someone seeks to do damage to their own body, half the country is tempted to think that that's fine, that's acceptable. Whereas I would just try to point out that if we think that human rights are real, if we think that the dignity of human life, the sanctity of human life is a real thing and not just the whim of the majority, then that doesn't give anyone else the right to slice up my body. Yeah. And it also means it would be wrong for me to slice up my own body.
Absolutely.
Which is a gift given to me by my Creator.
Right. And I think this is one of those that has more popular support than we realize, right? Media, television, all of that society says, no, everybody wants this. But then if you look at the fact that the Save Women's Sports thing is an 80-20 issue, the logical next step of that is, well, 80% of the people realize that we're not kidding anybody, that a man is a man, regardless of what they look like on the outside. And these genetic differences are incredibly important and significant. And if you're not going to let a transgender male compete in high school sports, then we shouldn't allow transgender surgeries for minors. Like, you're not actually changing who they are. You're changing the way they look with drastic psychological and physical consequences. Like the puberty blockers and things like that they're giving. They like to use the term puberty blockers, but in many cases, it's a chemical sterilization, right? Like these are horrific practices that are incredibly dangerous. And think about, too, that the shift, like we were talking about a second ago, and kind of that almost aesthetic difference between men and women based off of preferences and inclinations, as opposed to biology. If you have a young child who's trying to grow up, trying to understand their hormones, trying to understand their body, trying to understand what they like and what they do. If you have a 5-year-old girl that loves to get outside and roughhouse and play in the mud, and you say, oh no, well, girls don't do that, you must be a boy, right? Like, that's just, it's so foolish. So foolish. And the same thing with a young boy who likes to help his mom in the kitchen. Like, you don't like to go outside and roughhouse. You'd rather come in here and mix, I don't know, cook dinner or bake something or be more artistic. Like any of the stereotypes that we say we don't lump people into, but then when it comes to these types of things, we immediately go right back to those stereotypes and say, well, because you fit this stereotype, you must be different than your biology says you are.
Yeah, it's always the people, accusing everybody else of oversimplifying or imposing presuppositions that are generally projecting. And
it's crazy the extent to which they do it, right? Because it's not even just hey, you like this, so you fit this category. It's you like this, so we're going to cut your body apart and totally change who you are. Like it's so crazy. Like
we're going to play God.
Yeah, these are the people that call us weird, right? Yeah. Like it's insanity.
Well, kids' lives and bodies and ability to procreate are on the line. It's unbelievable. You're talking about sterilization being normalized and
Right.
called healthcare when, you flip over a different page in the encyclopedia and that's part of the definition of genocide.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This
It
is
just
good.
seems like these things haven't connected yet
Yeah.
in the cultural mind. And my greatest concern is that we're prone to making the mistake of giving this thing a pass because we've been conditioned, more broadly speaking, culturally, to, just if people want that, I guess that's fine.
Right.
Yeah,
especially in the realm of sexuality, right? That was the lie from the 60s that your sexual identity and your sexual pleasure is the height of who you are as a person. I was just watching an episode of West Wing last night, and, it's a fairly liberal show, but watching it now, it doesn't seem that terrible, right? Because it was Democrats in the 90s, who thought abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, right? Like if I had a Democrat that proposed that, I would be ecstatic, right? Like that would be a huge step in the right direction. But in there, they had a character who was a congressman, he was a Republican, and he was openly gay. And he was getting consistently pressured by the White House to oppose this piece of legislation that was coming up. I think it was a Defense of Marriage Act type thing. And he kept going back and saying, look, the fact, like, my sexuality is not all that I am, right? I am more than this. Like, that is not the sole part of my identity. That's not the whole of my identity. It's a part of my identity. And I think that's consistent today, right? We continue to push these folks into, hey, this is all consuming for you, right? Whichever your sexual desires are is the biggest part of your personality, the biggest part of your identity, and you need to lean into it and talk about it all the time, everywhere. And it's so foolish because it's such a small part of who we are as humans. We miss so much beauty and so much wonder in other parts of our lives.
Yeah. I think it also speaks to the absence of the hope of heaven.
Absolutely.
What are we living for? What is the greatest
Right.
bliss available to man? Well,
Yeah.
it's sex. It's
Yeah.
the pleasure that we find
Right.
there. And therefore, that becomes the thing that we obsessively chase, even though, you live a few years, you get married, and you
Right.
realize, like, there's so much more to life. This is
Right.
amazing.
Yeah.
But if you're selling people this idea that this is everything, this is the end all be all, this is the ultimate, like it's a perversion of sexuality in itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't create healthy relationships.
Nope.
Doesn't create realistic expectations.
Right.
It's ridiculous how warped the cultural view of sexuality has been,
Yeah.
and it's gotten worse since the sexual revolution.
Yeah. This is one of the big problems with pornography, right? And I think it'll be very interesting to see how far Congress attempts to go in this pro-child legislation push. But a national age restriction on pornography would
that would be
huge,
fantastic.
right? We've seen a lot of states that have started to go down this path with great results to protect kids. Pornography is incredibly harmful, especially on developing brains. It's harmful for everybody, but it's especially harmful on children because, like you said, it warps the way they view sex. It warps the way they view relationships. It's just horrific consequences from this stuff. So I think that would be another huge step in that approach. I think, again, approaching this from a pro-child perspective.
Yes.
Katie Faust, with them before us out of was it Washington State, has done incredible work on this. And I think this really is the way forward for the conservative movement, is taking these things that historically have been social ideas and tying them to the health and well-being of children. Because children for too long have been the ones that suffer from these bad ideas. Right? John Stonestreet likes to say, ideas have consequences, bad ideas have victims. These bad social ideas have been victimizing children for decades. So we could keep talking about this for a while. Let's kind of keep going. So Project 2025, obviously blew up big time about 6 months out from the election, maybe 8 months out. And with it, though, there's kind of 4 main policy ideas that they promote. And the thing to remember about Project 2025, they made it sound like it's this sinister right-wing conspiracy, but in reality, it's a policy objective plan created by a think tank in DC. Every think tank in DC creates these policy objective plans every cycle. They do it every presidential cycle. They do it every congressional cycle. So this is nothing new. This is nothing different. This is nothing out of the ordinary. But kind of the 4 main parts of the outline is restoring the family, dismantling the administrative state, defending the nation's borders, and securing individual rights. So we've talked about restoring the family through the transgender stuff, the Save Women's Sports, the anti-genital mutilation stuff for minors, potentially the age restrictions for pornography. All of those things help restore the family and create healthy families. And then the other part, restoring our borders, I think is going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. I think really with those other three, there's a lot of work that the administration can do from the executive right off the bat. On the border piece, the mass deportations of illegals, which, the left makes it sound like we're doing death marches and loading people on cattle cars and
Trail of Tears.
yeah, all
2.0.
right. And that's just not true. Since the Biden
It's not like
administration,
we're Democrats.
right? Exactly.
The whole Andrew Jackson thing.
Yeah, and then if we look at which presidents have actually put people in internment camps, they were both Democrats, Roosevelt and Wilson.
Projection.
Yeah, we have a terrible track record on this. Democrats like to ignore their own history pretty significantly.
Yeah.
But so we look at since the Biden administration took office, there's been close to 6.5, almost 7 million people that have come here illegally. All of those people can go home tomorrow, right? They're not established here. There's no. It's not inhumane to say someone who crossed our borders, broke our law, should go back to where they came from. There are plenty of opportunities to come in and seek asylum. There are plenty of opportunities to come in and seek whether it's student visas, temporary work visas. There's a whole host of paths to come to the United States legally, and to think that we as a society need these 6.5, 7 million people is foolish. Now, there's a lot of work that the administration can do without Congress, simply by restoring things that were already passed and already in law that Congress never overturned. So there's still border wall to be built that's funded. There's still the Remain in Mexico policy to be reinstated. There's a number of these things that can happen right away that will help secure those borders. And then there will be some stuff that needs to be passed, whether it's more funding for more wall, more funding for more agents to actually do the enforcement, more funding for admin folks to come in and do the paperwork so that those who should be enforcing can be enforcing. There's, I'd love to see an actual comprehensive immigration reform bill, whether that's, a new, quote, path to citizenship. I think there's anytime somebody comes here illegally and breaks the law, they should be deported. I don't think many people would disagree with that. If you break the law, especially at the felony level, you should get sent home. Now, there's millions of people that are here that are illegal that we're not going to be able to deport, that we're not going to be able to find. And then the question is, what do we do for them? How do we restore them to right relationship with us as a country? And so whether that's creating some regional centers where people can come in, register. It could be the post office. You go to the post office, you register, you say, hey, I'm here illegally. I want to be on a quote path to citizenship. And then that takes them on a journey of a year to 2 years of going to classes and having to take tests and do the actual citizenship stuff, just being allowed to remain here while they do it. Bobby Jindal used to say immigration without assimilation is invasion, and I think he's exactly right. We have to maintain an identity as a country, and we can't do that if people come in and then remain how they were when they got here, right? It's I'm not going to go so far as to say it's like being a Christian, but it's similar in that if you go to church and you get saved, life change has to happen. If you come to the United States and you want to be a citizen, that means that you're giving up the citizenship of the country that you came from, and you're coming here to start a new life and to be an American, not a Irish American or a Jewish American or a Mexican American. You're here to be an American, and we have to redeem that core value. So there's a number of different ways this could play out. I think Congress should. I think the president should go to Congress with a comprehensive immigration plan. I think it would be well received. I think people want to see movement on this, and I think this first 100 days would be a great way to do it. But I've ranted on that for a bit. Do you have any thoughts on immigration and families and all of that?
Yeah, well, I appreciate what you're saying. I always find it ironic that, well, first of all, when we're talking about people's rights, what people are entitled to, it's worth pointing out. No one has a natural right to be a citizen of any given country.
Absolutely.
You have a natural right to many things.
Right.
But political citizenship is of another country you weren't born into is not one of them. Now, assimilation is possible, and naturalization. You can go petition and seek to join yourself to a new country. Anybody can do that. And that's possible, but there's ways to do that respect the people of that society, so that you're showing them the respect that they are due as a sovereign people on your way into that society that you want to become a part of.
Yeah.
The other part of this is, it seems like as soon as we talk about deportation, I hear people on the news and commentators, they end up talking about the rest of the world. Like there's America, incredible breadbasket, shining city on a hill, and everything outside of our borders is a hellscape.
Which is exactly what they gave President Trump such a hard time for.
I know.
In the first
There's
administration
a
about
deep
these
irony in
specific
it.
countries that were.
But they begin talking about deporting people like you're committing a crime against humanity.
Right.
By sending people back to any other country other than the United States. And they end up talking about the rest of the world in such a disparaging way.
Yeah.
That reeks of an elitism, to say the least. But
and for a long time, so a quick note on that. For a long time, we had very specific immigration quotas of different types of people that could come to the U.S., different types of skills, and different types of education backgrounds, and all of that. And we were holding a standard, like you're talking about before, for what it took to come to the United States. Right? It wasn't just anybody and everybody. However, at the same time, we had a very robust asylum program, so that if you were in a country that was actually being persecuted, right? If you were fleeing the Nazis, if you were fleeing the potato famine, you could come here and start a new life, and we would let you in. That's why at the base of the Statue of Liberty is it gives us you're tired, you're poor, you're hungry, you're huddled masses. And we've always had a both and process. And it seems like anyway, in the last 20 years, that both and process has shifted very heavily to just the weak, just the poor, just the huddled masses. And we have not been poaching talent. We have not been taking people who are at the height of their respective careers from these other countries and bringing them here and helping to have a rising tide that raises all ships, right? So I think we have to get back to that quota-based immigration process, while at the same time strengthening our asylum protections and our asylum process, so that it weeds out the people who are just on a caravan because they can't get the benefits they need in their country, and they think they can get the benefits they need here, and they're not actually interested in becoming an American.
Yeah. Or, I mean, if people objectively around the world think my life would improve if I lived in America, well, that might be true, but what duty do you have to your homeland, to your family, to the place of your fathers and your grandfathers?
Yeah.
This is a conversation worth having.
Absolutely.
For any healthy country, any healthy civilization. If it's going to last, you need people willing to stick around and fight for it. And, I'm grateful that people want to move to America and assimilate, become contributing citizens. That's great. Yeah. But at the same time, we ought to have an eye looking out for the good of the rest of the nations around us in our region, because the more destabilized those countries become and the less healthy they become, it affects us in other adverse ways.
Right.
So,
absolutely. And I think, and not to go too far on the foreign policy part of this discussion, but I do think we need to see a significant way in the change we do our USAID program, right? Our USAID program, and shift it from hey, here's a bunch of free rice, to let's help you get your property law in order. Let's help you improve your infrastructure. Let's help you understand how to set up these systems and actually run a country so that your best and your brightest will want to stay and want to build, right? If your best and brightest just want to leave because they think they're going to have a better life somewhere else, and they have not been told and instructed by, their fellow citizens, if they don't have a strong national culture of, we're from this country, from country X, and we're going to be the next United States in 200 years from now. Right. If you don't have that builder mentality, then you are just going to flee. You're going to go somewhere else. You're going to take the quote easy way out. And there's a lot of factors that play into that. Part of it is kind of like you said, a global culture of the United States is kind of sort of better than everybody else, and you can't really build a life in your continent because you don't have as developed of countries. Well, you just have to stay there and continue to develop your country, right? Like you don't have it because you don't do it.
And it's just worth mentioning, like, that is the way to best show love and honor to your family
Yeah.
and the people around you, your community, the people that came before you and
Right.
and built the society up
Yeah.
before you ever got there.
Even with the way we do refugees and refugee resettlements, right? If you have a conflict in the Middle East, we were saying, hey, let's bring all of these refugees back here to the United States. Or like with Haiti, right? Haiti's been in this war-torn environment for quite a while now. Let's bring these Haitian refugees and settle them, all of them, together in the middle of a small town in Ohio. I mean, that's just foolish, right? These people don't need to come to America. They need to be resettled close to home so that when the violence and all of that stuff dies down, they can go back, right? Like that's the goal is for these people to return home. The goal is for them not to have to be exiled from their culture and their land and their family history. It's let's help them get through this immediate turbulent time and then get them back to where they came from.
Yeah, I mean that is the whole settler approach, right?
Right.
The colonialist drive is we're going to go and build,
Yeah.
and that actually accomplished incredible things in terms of expanding the wealth centers of the world and creating greater quality of life in more parts of the world.
Right.
Rather than everyone retreating to the 2 and 3 places that had it figured out. So,
Yeah.
but there, you need a certain amount of optimism and hope,
You do.
and perseverance to go to a strange place, to build something
Right.
that doesn't exist right now.
So-
And that's something worth applauding. I mean, once upon a time, America, it was a regular thing for us to honor the settlers, right, as the people who did that hard work,
Right.
Gen 1.
Yeah.
And we don't really talk about them in the same way now, that pioneering culture. But that's something that I find highly admirable.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely it is.
And I'm glad you brought up asylum, too, because
Yeah.
it should automatically go without saying. There
Right.
are
Totally agree.
absolutely people who are victims of their own governments.
Yep.
And this is all the more complicated by the presence of cartels and their pervasive
Yes,
presence
it
in
is.
South America. And that's a whole different can of worms that
Mm-hmm.
has to be dealt with more effectively than we
Right.
know how to right now.
Yeah, because you basically have dual governments in all of these countries that have a strong cartel presence, right? You
Real,
have the official and the
the
unofficial.
faux government, the sham government, and the shadow government.
Right. Yeah, and neither are effective. This is good. We're just about out of time, so let's shift real quick and
Sure.
talk about the new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, as it's been called. I think first, my thoughts. I think this is a great opportunity. It's not an actual department, which is good because the only thing that lasts. There's nothing that's more eternal than a new department in the government. But at the same time, it's this group of guys that are going to be going through tens of thousands of pages of budgets and regulations, and sending a report back to the president and saying, look, this stuff, we're funding these items. We don't need to fund these items. This is wasteful spending. And then the president takes that report, walks down the hall and gives it to his director of OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and says, hey, look, we're not going to fund these programs anymore. It's wasteful spending. OMB says, great, you've been allotted. He goes to those department heads, says, look, you've been allotted $5 million to study the sex habits of pigeons on cocaine. I think it was quail on cocaine. True story. I think it was $2 million for quail that were on cocaine, studying their sex habits, because that's what we do at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Like, what are we talking about?
Where
here?
would society be, though, if we didn't
I know.
do that study?
What a shame. What a missed opportunity. But OMB says, hey, look, Congress has budgeted $2 million for this project. However, we're only going to give you $0 for this project. And then that money gets returned back to the Treasury at the end of that budget cycle. So there's plenty of ways for this to be very effective, very fast. I think also with the Chevron decision from the Supreme Court, which basically said these unelected bureaucrats and these agencies like the EPA are no longer allowed to create regulations that have the authority of law, basically. And that power is getting returned to Congress. So Congress is going to have to take a bigger role in those types of things. So, but with a mix between DOGE saying, hey, look, here's these useless regulations, Congress saying, hey, we have control over these regulations now, and we're going to slice them. And the executive also saying, hey, I have some control over these regulations, we're going to slice them too. And then changing that budget structure, I think we're going to see some pretty significant deflation of our bureaucracy, which would just be incredible.
Yeah, it would be. And clearly, efficiency does not automatically happen within government and
No,
bureaucracy.
no, it does
So
not.
this is the kind of thing that ought to be done in waves and in cycles to go back and clean house. And
Absolutely.
these kinds of reforms are always necessary over time.
Yeah. I think in the first administration, the if I remember right, the president's rule was before we create one new regulation, we have to cut two others. So you're still on a net decrease of regulation. I want to think, if I remember the quote right, I believe he has said up to this point that if you create a new piece of regulation, there will be a reduction of 4 previous regulations, which is
boy.
just amazing. I mean, it makes you so happy to hear it. So it's going to be a very interesting 6 months. Some people are, there's always these cycles that happen, right? So you have a president that comes in, he does his big agenda in the first 100 days, and then time passes and the people kind of fall out of love with him. And then there's normally some type of crisis that comes up, whether it's an economic downturn or a foreign invasion of some kind or an attack or whatever. And then at the 2-year mark, there's a referendum on that administration, and you see the House of Representatives flip, and it changes control. I don't think I'm gonna be bullish. I'm gonna go out on a limb, and I'm gonna say I don't think that happens this time.
Ooh.
I think we pick up seats in the House. I think the combination of slicing bureaucracy, controlling our border, the mass deportations, the tax decreases, I think we're going to see economic boom, and I think we're going to see a really strong 4 years for our economy and for our country. And I think people are going to be excited about the progress we've made in that first 2 years, and then they're going to come back to the voting booth and they're going to be energized for more of the same. So that's my prediction. It's Yogi Berra used to say it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future, but that's it. That's where it's at.
I think that's possible. I'm reminded of what you opened with. There are a sizable number of Americans that voted split ticket.
Yep.
What does that say? Maybe it just means they're very upset with where things are at. They vote for something different, but also they're not just voting for a party, so therefore they vote for coalition. Maybe it's a coalition vote.
Yeah, I think on split ticket piece, the people that voted for their Republican congressman but against Donald Trump, in the small instances when that happened, I think that was a small number of people that have kind of that personal vendetta of never Trump. He's made too many problems. He has too many problems, too much baggage, too much whatever. For the people who voted for their Democratic congressman and then voted for Trump, which was a much larger coalition,
right?
I think they were just very unhappy with Kamala Harris as a candidate. I don't remember if I tweeted it or if I posted it or if I just sent it in a group chat. Yeah, or Biden. If I sent it in the group chat, but I said I really hope Democrats remember after this election that America is just absolutely misogynistic and racist, and that's why they didn't elect Kamala Harris, and that it had nothing to do with her as a candidate. I mean, that's what they're saying, right? That's what The View said the day after. That's what Morning Joe said the day after. And it's just this hubris that if we don't check, if we check the correct identity boxes, then everybody is going to elect our candidate. And it has nothing to do with who they are as an individual, has nothing to do with their record, has nothing to do with their vision for the future. Vibes don't vote, right? And we saw that very clearly. So I think that group will expand, was my point. I think the people that voted for Donald Trump and did not vote, but then voted for their Democratic congressman, I could see them making the same decision again in 2 years and saying, look, I like what Donald Trump has done. I like what the Congress has accomplished. Nobody has attempted anything too crazy and extreme. No national abortion ban hasn't come up. Whatever. I want to see more of the same. I'm going to vote for my Republican congressman this time around. And then you flip,
Yeah,
five out of those 10 seats.
They might be persuadable if there's a lot of
if we see
clear
the growth.
benefit in the next 2 years.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed it.
Always, Brice.
Appreciate you coming back, and looking forward to seeing you next time.
It's great to be back. Look forward to the next one. See ya.
We want to take a second and say thank you to our sponsor, Stand for Georgia Values. They are pro-family, pro-business, pro-public safety PAC based out of Cherokee County, Georgia, and they're the reason that we get to continue to bring you regular content. So we're very thankful for their support. You can find out more about them at gavalues.org. They're on Facebook and Twitter as well. Please make sure and go give them a like and a follow. we're incredibly thankful to have their support.